I believe we have in this very room the imagination, human curiosity, and capacity to solve all the world's problems and reach our potentials. It's the opportunity to create a future versus leave it to chance. With a show of hands, how many of you would sign up to create your futures? I also believe it won't happen unless we change our approach and our ability to be intentional in how we live our lives. And let me be clear, it is our intention that matters. I grew up in a small town, 832 people, 42 in my graduating class. It was the kind of town that had the same number of churches as bars, and we had only one stop sign, where the only people that stopped there didn't live there. It was the kind of place that described you by your church that you went to, where you lived, in town or on the farm, and most importantly, your last name. And it was this combination of things that almost predestined what others thought you should be doing in the future. And it bothered me. This is my life. Why should anyone have anything to say about what they think I should be doing in the future? Not my town, not my neighbors, not myself. When I went away to college, I went from being the only Nancy Johnson to one of 5 Nancy Johnsons. Good for me that I was the only Nancy M. Johnson. I learned to use my middle initial and share a mailbox to get my mail. My journey took me initially on 4 internships to understand my career interests, and then to 4 industries where I was served as president of 3 organizations with as many as 15,000 employees, manufacturing facilities, field offices, retail locations located across North America with just shy of $1 billion in sales. It was here in my journey to create my future that I expanded my view from leading myself to leading others and gained valuable insights about the dynamics of leadership. You see, we live in a complex world that is on a one-way ticket to faster. The pace has outstripped our ability as humans to keep up. The skills that got us here are not enough for us to reach our future potentials. We have much more work to do. And the context of the world is complicated because it's no longer about our neighborhoods, our towns, or our state. We're all connected. But it both matters and is critically important, and it's frankly where we spend the least amount of time because we're too busy rushing around to try to find answers. You see, there's never been this much change in a single lifetime in human history. And it creates an environment that no longer favors the human experience. So how do we find space in this world of chaos to be healthy and do our best work? Let's start by taking a look at the timeline and look at time on one axis and change on the other, and then consider our ability to adapt. We can make a decision today, and through time, improve our ability to do the task. But if we think about the complexity that we just talked about, in the early part of human history, our ability was well matched to understand the complexity of the world that we lived in. But that's no longer the case. So we have a decision to make. We can live on the right side of the line and react to our future, leaving very little time to catch our breath because we're on 24/7. It's a sure way to burn out. Or we can choose to live on the left side of the line and create our futures. It's the possibility to anticipate where things are going and be prepared and intentional to meet those needs. But more importantly, it's about making decisions that favor the human experience and set us up to do our best work. So for me, it's really about choosing to lead your life versus just manage it. Which leads us to this question about what do we do about all that? I think there's a 2-part answer. First, of how do we lead ourselves? And then if we're going to be a leader, how do we lead others? It starts by being a student of ourselves. Let's stop trying to be like everyone else and admit that we're different. Let's focus there and ask ourselves the question of what's our best game? Let's practice and focus there, showing up in our communities and our organizations and with others to do our best work. When we reject this notion of fitting in, we regain the richness of our human capacity and our future potential. It's an exciting place to be. When my youngest son went to college, he called me 6 weeks into his freshman fall semester. Said he wanted to change his major from being a DNR officer. I must admit, I expected to hear that maybe the students were strange, the professors were nerds, or there was something wrong with the work that they were asking him to do. But that's not what I heard. What I heard instead was that he had spent time with DNR officers, and he said, I learned some things. He said, Mom, they write tickets, and there's no competition. They work alone. I like working with teams. They have to work on every opening, hunting, and fishing season. I can never be part of the family traditions again. He said none of them were married. And after even advanced degrees, they don't make the kind of money I want to make to live the life I want to live. His response made me smile. He demonstrated for me on that day that he was willing to do the hard work, the uncomfortable work of trying things on and figuring out what was right for him. But more importantly, he was willing to stand up for what he needed to do his best work instead of hearing what others thought he needed. You see, it's the first step in leading your life and creating your future. Then it's about how do you fuel your curiosity and willing to discover and figure things out, because you see, there is no answer book in life. We must continue to evolve and figure out what works as we move along our journey. It's funny how when we were born, we had a great sense of curiosity, asked tons of questions, bothered our parents with that kind of thing. But as we grow older, we lose that curiosity because we get too busy doing life and looking for answers. It's important that we stay intentional in fueling our curiosity. It's our natural human ability. Then it's about learning to manage time. It's the great equalizer. We all only get 24 hours a day. We can't save it, can't buy more. We don't get more if our stature's better, or if, it doesn't even matter if we wasted an entire day yesterday. We get the same amount every day. And our life's impact will be measured by how we spend the time, not in how much we have. So what goes on our calendars first matters. It's funny how we run around and get from everybody what they want us to do and put that on the calendar. And then we're left with this question of, how do I fit my life into my calendar? I think we need to do the reverse. Let's put what's important to us on the calendar and be proactive about it so that we can schedule everything around that. It will ensure that we get to live our life and not just do it. It's our calendars. Let's make sure it looks like our life. Which means we also need to be committed to hit pause to reboot. You see, our ability to be healthy is directly related to our ability to be outside and physically active. And yet today's American adults spend more time in their cars than they do outside. And only 10% of our American teenagers are outside every day. You see, when we get close to nature, we do our overstressed brains a huge favor. So it's important that we stay focused there. I think it's interesting how when we hit pause on a video machine, everything stops. But when we do so in the human experience, everything starts. And today we can get anything we want with the touch of a button. It doesn't require us to physically travel the distance. So it requires us to remember that our ability to be healthy is both being in nature outside and being physically active so that we can stay committed to that. And then it's about what are we doing to build real, authentic relationships and connections. We are more connected now than we have ever been in our history. But in our 80-year lifespan, it's projected that we will spend 11 years looking at screens. Yeah, I said 11 years. The more time that we spend in this abstract world, the more we lose touch with reality because it doesn't require you to physically be there, which is what's required for you to build authentic relationships, practice and build your communication skills so that it endures time. They're frankly the skills that we need to meet the complexities of the world that we face today. So I've painted a picture of what it looks like for us to live in this world and lead ourselves, but what about part two? What if we choose to lead others? What does it mean for leadership? over the course of my career, I've had many people come to me and say, I want to be like you, Nancy. And I've kind of said, what does that mean? What I've learned is that they looked at my leadership career and said, I want that. Or they've looked at the leadership of the major change and innovation that I've led and said, I want that. And often they would want to work together as a mentor and mentee, and because I'm passionate about helping people discover their best game and working with them to actually do it, I agreed. But I discovered something that was true 100% of the time. They hadn't done their own work. They didn't know how they worked, wanted to skip a step and just lead others. But leadership doesn't work that way. You see, training to be a leader is like training to run a marathon. Training to lead innovation and change is like training for an Ironman. It's important to do our own work so we know how we work. If we haven't done that, we have nothing to give anyone else. When you think about your leadership role in an organization, human capital represents about 70 to 80% of all the expense in an organization. And I would tell you, I think it's the biggest wasteland we have. If you look at the research, you can see that leaders, in fact, do improve your ability to engage. We've all had an example of that, I'm sure, in our lives that said they made a difference. They were my difference maker. But I think we also have the examples of those leaders who caused us to disengage. Made us question whether we brought value. Didn't ask us questions, don't we? I think it's time for a much more intentional leadership approach. And for me, as a leader, it starts with knowing your story and then learning to tell it. It's what allows you to make that human connection first to yourself and then to others. And for me, our stories are two parts. We have an inside story and an outside story. The outside story is what you can hear in the introduction like you did today, or maybe you Googled me before I arrived. Maybe you saw my resume or checked me out on LinkedIn. That's my outside story. But let me ask you, do you really think that you know me? I mean, really know me? You know nothing about my inside story. Sure, you know that I grew up in a small town, but do you really understand what makes me tick? I don't think so. Would you have suspected that I'm the oldest of three? Or that I'm an avid hunter and I like time in the field with my family and friends and the dog? Or that I'm a serious motorcyclist and motocross is my favorite sport? I like time on the track and organizing rides with other riders. Or that this is my bike. You see, when people can connect with your full story, it offers you the opportunity to make an authentic connection that shows them that you have heart. Without it, your ability to lead will be diminished. It's important to be able to tell that story. I would tell you that it took me 40 years to be able to tell the story in the way that I just told it to you. And it's important to embrace that your story has value to other people because it shows them who you really are. It's one of the things that I think, frankly, we get wrong with name tags. Because you see, when you put Nancy M. Dahl and a CEO in a name tag, it's intimidating and scary. The title is only temporary, and it tells you nothing about who I am as a person. When you put Nancy M. Dahl in something I'm passionate about, like motorcycles, not only does the conversation get more interesting, but I become real and approachable. It allows me to make that connection I talked about, and frankly, creates the reality that makes your leadership possible. And then as leaders, what are we doing to connect those people in much the same way? It's important as leaders that we understand what makes each person powerful, and then put them in position so that they can develop and succeed, and with teams that are required of the unique skills that you bring to the party. Because when you understand the goal, and you understand why you're on the team, you get connected. But I would tell you it's much more than understanding your role. It's really about understanding your personal contribution. My oldest son played lacrosse. He's 6'8". He's a bit intimidating when you go to meet him on the way to the goalie. His coach drafted him for a tournament midway through the season, and it was quite an honor and a sense of pride, frankly, for Eric, because he wasn't one of the star players. The coach took extra time to say, this is why I draft you. predicted that he wouldn't play very much, but he said, when you do, this is the contribution I want you to make. By the coach taking extra time to connect with Eric and every other player and be clear about the contribution, it allowed the team to see that this coach had heart. But more importantly, it allowed each player to connect with each other because they understood each other's best game. They could show up playing that to engage and show up with all of their power. That coach's intentional leadership was a difference maker that day. It allowed the players to play their best game and allowed them to connect heart and build a winning tradition. My boys had 42 coaches over the course of their career, and this is the only coach that understood the power of this connection. It's frankly the connection we all need to make to reach our future, create our futures, and reach our potential. But as leaders, we must ask ourselves, what else do we need to learn? If we can take an example from this coach, what other things do we need to figure out on our way to create our futures and anticipate that ricochet? You know, as leaders, we set sales and profit goals, but do we ever really talk about what we need to learn? If we do, it invites everyone in and reminds them that we have work to do to anticipate that ricochet and create that future. You see, learning is key, and it requires an environment that offers creativity and discovery that allows us to ask those questions. It's funny how over my travels, as I talk with leaders, the one thing they all say is, oh, I'm committed to innovation and change. But I've learned that there's only one question I really need to ask them to understand if it's true. Ask a leader where they're innovating and changing in their personal life, and wait for the answer. If they can't give you one, they're not committed. The minute that innovation and change shows up on that leader's desk and affects how they do their work, it's over. It's done. So think about the next time that you meet a leader. Ask them that question. It will allow you to see whether what they're saying, they really mean it. How are they walking their talk? It's important that we do that. I've found that when I establish Learn Out Loud disciplines, it tells the entire organization that I value learning and not just the results. It also signals to them that I'm confident that the organization can figure it out and that no one is exempt from the front line of learning. There are 5 disciplines in Learn Out Loud, starting with embracing diverse perspectives. It's important that people understand that they can bring you bad news or a different perspective than you have. It needs to be safe to show up your door with that kind of news. And you may need to remind people that no one goes missing when they do. Then how do you seek feedback from people that have technically had the same experience, but their perspectives are different, like these 2 dogs? The one on the right had the time of his life. The one on the left about drowned. Their perspectives matter. How do you process that judgment? How do you process that feedback? And then how do you defer judgment and leave room for the human element to figure stuff out? Try it on. Figure out what works and doesn't. Quit rushing for an answer. How do you acknowledge learning as one of the milestones and accept less than perfect? And how do you celebrate forward movement so that everyone gets to feel the success and everyone gets energized for the next step? Because you see, learning is key in innovation and change. It creates the agility that we need personally to meet our futures, as well as the organization. But it requires that curiosity that I talked about. And I think it's important to remember what we uniquely bring to this situation. As humans, intelligence made us the most dominant species on the planet. It's our ability to understand the human emotion, the motivation, and the behavior. It's the nuances. The data is just served to us to be curious and ask additional questions. And regardless of how sophisticated the technology has been that it delivered the data, it's just a reflection of our people. And technology isn't the solution either, unless it focuses and makes those impactful human connections more powerful. Because you see, it's those leaders that understand that that will get the most out of their people because the data, the technology, and the numbers are put in service of a humanistic culture, not a replacement for it. And change and innovation is personal first. It requires all of us to be doing. We can read about it, we can talk to people about it, but until we actually get doing it, it isn't going to matter. It requires us to be doing. And as leaders, it's important to know that it also acknowledges fear. It creates incompetence and obsolescence in our people and makes everyone question their value. So it's important that we meet everyone where they are and walk together, because meeting the future needs is it requires us all to be engaged and all to be asking questions. And along the way, we're going to meet this really interesting cast of characters. I've labeled them the guardians of no progress. Do you know any of them? They're the ones that you meet when you're trying to move things forward that say to you, that's not how we do things around here. It's important we acknowledge their presence and then redefine their roles and contributions. Because if we're disciplined in our learning, we can move even this group forward. And communication will be our key. Where are we going? Where are we at? And what do we need next? It allows everyone to engage more fully along the way when they hit the obstacles that we are certain to make. Bottom line is going to be about persistence. How do we reframe those obstacles? How do we know that we're right on the right path and be focused on the goal, but be a little bit flexible in terms of how we're going to get there? So let me ask you, why would you waste any of your time managing your life when you can lead and live your life to a future that you created? You have everything you need. You just need to decide that you're worth it. Thank you for your time today.